She never imagined that apologizing for her broken English would cost her the date and give her a love she never thought possible. This is the story of an immigrant woman, a single father, and the moment a simple coffee date revealed a secret that shattered every expectation. A story about language, identity, and the courage it takes to be vulnerable when you feel like a foreigner in every room. If you stay with me until the end, you'll discover why sometimes the most profound connections begin with the words we are most afraid to speak, and why the greatest understanding comes not from perfect grammar, but from a perfectly heard heart. Her name was Anya, a software engineer who fled a war-torn country 6 years ago, carrying her language like a shield and a scar. His name was Leo, a widowed architect raising his young son alone in a city that never slowed down. On a rainy Tuesday evening, a dating app algorithm brought them to the same table at a downtown bistro. She had rehearsed her apology in the mirror. He had a secret tucked behind a warm smile. This is what happens when the wall you built for protection becomes the very thing someone chooses to walk through. For Anya Petrova, language was not just communication, it was a constant calculation of risk. Every sentence in English was a tightrope walk between being understood and being judged. She had arrived from Kiev 6 years earlier with a degree in computer science, a suitcase of memories, and a heart still echoing with air raid sirens. Her new life in Chicago was built on code, clean, logical binary. It obeyed her. English did not. At work, her technical precision was revered. In the break room, her slight accent and occasional stumble over idioms like piece of cake or spill the beans made her feel like a permanent guest. Dating was a special kind of battlefield. A survey of immigrants found 73% said finding a relationship was more difficult than in their home country. Anya believed it. Her last date had ended when the man, after her third request for clarification, had sighed and said, "Never mind, it's not important." The dismissal was a wound deeper than criticism. It was erasure. So when her friend Maria insisted she try one more time with a guy who seemed different, Anya crafted a strategy. She would be upfront, apologetic. She would lower expectations before they could be disappointed. Her armor would be her own perceived flaw. Across the city, Leo Morty was wrestling with a different kind of loneliness. 2 years had passed since lymphoma stole his wife, Elena, leaving him and their 5-year-old son, Luca, in a house that felt both too large and suffocatingly small. Leo was an architect, his mind trained to build structures that stood strong. His personal life had collapsed. His love languages had been acts of service and physical touch, fixing a leaky faucet, a hand on the small of Elena's back. Now the service was packed lunches, and the touch was tucking a sleepy boy into bed. His escape had come before the grief. For 3 years in his late 20s, his firm had posted him to Milan. It was more than a job, it was an immersion. He didn't want to be another expat in an English bubble. He took night classes, made local friends who refused to speak to him in English, and dated an Italian artist who teased his grammar mercilessly until it became fluent. He left Italy conversational, carrying the language like a cherished souvenir. Now it was just a dormant skill, a part of a past life that felt disconnected from his present as a widowed father. Maria's setup was strategic. "He's kind," she'd told Anya, "a good dad, and he's traveled." To Leo, she said, "She's brilliant, strong, and she could use someone who sees her, not just her accent." The bistro was Maria's choice too, busy enough for background noise, intimate enough to talk, neutral ground. Anya arrived first, 15 minutes early. She chose a corner table, her back to the wall, a view of the door. She practiced her opening line in her head, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. "I'm sorry if my English is not perfect." It was a preemptive strike against mockery. Leo arrived exactly on time, a slight drizzle glistening in his dark hair. He'd come from Luca's soccer practice, the scent of rain and grass still on his jacket. He saw her before she saw him. She was studying the menu with intense focus, as if deciphering a complex algorithm. He recognized the posture, not of disinterest, but of preparation. He'd seen it in boardrooms before big presentations. He felt a pang of unexpected protectiveness. He slid into the chair opposite her. "Anya, I'm Leo. It's really nice to meet you." The conversation began like a careful dance. The weather, their jobs, the bizarre mural on the bistro wall. Anya's responses were grammatically perfect but clipped. She was editing herself in real time, choosing simple words over complex ones, avoiding idioms entirely. Leo listened not just to her words, but to the spaces between them. He heard the hesitation before certain sounds, the slight rearrangement of sentence structure. He didn't hear struggle, he heard effort. And he understood it. Then, telling a story about a chaotic work project, Anya reached for the phrase, "a perfect storm." It tangled on her tongue. She mixed the metaphor, said a perfect tornado, then flushed. This was it, the moment she'd braced for, the moment the polite interest would frost over. She took a steadying breath, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I am sorry," she said, the words soft but deliberate. "My English, it is sometimes broken. I know this can be frustrating. Please be patient." She waited for the shrug, the glazed look, the change of subject. She had laid her vulnerability on the table between the wine glasses and bread basket. Leo was silent for a beat. He leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from polite attention to something warmer, more direct. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, but the words that came out were not in English. They were in Ukrainian. Clear, fluent, and utterly unexpected. The air between them didn't just shift, it transformed. For 3 full seconds, Anya was certain she had hallucinated from nervous exhaustion. The sounds were familiar, the melody of her childhood, but the source was impossible. She stared at Leo, her lips parted, the practiced apology dying in her throat. The gentle clatter of the bistro faded into a distant hum. "What did you say?" she whispered, still in English, her voice thin. Leo smiled, a real one that reached his eyes, and repeated himself in Ukrainian. "I said, your English isn't broken, it's beautiful, and you don't ever have to apologize for it to me." The direct translation unlocked her. A sound escaped her, a half laugh, half sob. Her hand flew to her mouth. "How, why?" The questions tumbled out in her native tongue, the words flowing fast and unfiltered for the first time all night. The story unfolded over a second glass of wine. His 3 years in Milan had bled into weekends traveling Eastern Europe. A project in Poland led to a fascination with the region. He'd learned some Polish, then found himself drawn to Ukrainian, its melodic complexity. He'd used apps, taken online tutors, and befriended a family from Lviv who ran a restaurant near his apartment. It was more than linguistics. It was a connection to a culture's heart, the poetry, the humor, the proverbs that lost their soul in translation. "I was never any good at the grammar rules," he admitted, switching back to English but leaving the door between languages wide open. "But I learned to listen, to hear the music in it." For Anya, it was like stepping out of a cramped room into open sky. The constant, wearying translation in her mind switched off. She told him about growing up in Kiev, the smell of chestnuts roasting in winter, her father's terrible jokes that only worked in Ukrainian. She described the disorienting silence of her first months in America, where she understood the words, but not the warmth, the subtext, the unspoken rules. She talked about her work, not in the clipped technical terms she used with colleagues, but with the passion of a builder creating worlds from nothing. Leo didn't just listen, he conversed. His Ukrainian was conversational, not perfect. He stumbled on verb aspects, asked for the word for debugging, but it was earnest. It was effort. And in that effort, Anya saw something she had stopped believing in, a genuine desire to cross the bridge to her, not demand she sprint across to him. The date didn't end when the check came. They walked through the damp streets, the conversation weaving between languages, a seamless tapestry. He walked her to her car. Under the glow of a street lamp, she looked at him, truly looked. The careful architect, the grieving widower, the man who had quietly learned a language simply to understand a piece of the world better. "This was not what I expected," she said softly. "Me neither," he replied. And then, in Ukrainian, "Can I see you again?" The word, yes, felt different this time. It wasn't a hesitant agreement to another interview in a foreign tongue. It was a key turning in a lock. Their second date was at a quiet park. Leo brought a blanket. Anya brought a pastry from a Ukrainian bakery she thought had closed years ago. They spoke in a hybrid language, English for practicalities, Ukrainian for stories. He told her about Alina, about the gutting silence of his house after she died, about Luca's small hand in his. Anya spoke of the war, not the politics on the news, but the personal rupture, the frantic calls to cousins, the helpless dread, the guilt of building a safe life on top of a tectonic plate of grief. This was the intimacy language barriers usually murdered. Studies show that emotional connection relies on the nuance of feeling, and when you're editing yourself to avoid mistakes, you erase your soul in the process. But here, in this shared space, nuance flourished. A pattern emerged. Saturday afternoons became theirs while Luka was with his grandparents. They were explorations, a Ukrainian film festival where he held her hand during a brutal scene, his grip tight, an architecture tour where she pointed out structural flaws with an engineer's eye, making him laugh with delight. They cooked together. She taught him to make borscht, her grandmother's recipe. He showed her how to make pasta from scratch, a skill from Milan. The language became their secret garden. He'd text her a silly, mistranslated proverb. She'd leave a voice note recounting her day, the switch between languages mirroring her shifting thoughts. For Anya, it was healing. The part of her identity she had compartmentalized as private or unwelcome was not just accepted, it was cherished. For Leo, speaking Ukrainian was a thread back to his curious, adventurous former self, a self he thought grief had buried. But a relationship isn't a dyad, it's a system, and their system had a third, crucial component, Luka. Leo had been cautiously introducing Anya's name in stories. My friend Anya says this, or I tried a recipe from Anya's country. Luka, a sensitive boy wrapped in the quiet sadness of missing his mother, was wary of new shadows in his father's life. Their first meeting was carefully orchestrated, a neutral, fun zone, the planetarium. Anya was nervous in a new way. This wasn't about grammar, it was about gravity, the gravity of a child's trust. She met Leo's strategy with one of her own. She didn't try to be a parent. She was simply a curious person. When Luka shyly showed her his favorite rock from his collection, she didn't say cool. She asked, in clear, simple English, what makes this one your favorite? Is it the color or the shape? She listened to his long, convoluted answer about silver stripes. She learned he loved space, dinosaurs, and peanut butter sandwiches without the crusts. She spoke to him only in English, respecting his world. But once, when Leo was getting snacks, Luka pointed to a constellation and said, "That's Orion, he has a belt." Anya smiled. In my language, we call him Orion too, but his belt, we sometimes call it the Three Knights. Luka's eyes widened. Knights, like with armor. Exactly, she said, and in that moment, she wasn't a threat or a replacement. She was a portal to a slightly different, interesting universe. After that day, Leo saw a change. Luka started asking, "Is Anya coming over?" The question was no longer tinged with anxiety, but with anticipation. For 8 weeks, they built this delicate, beautiful thing. Anya's apartment, once just a functional space, now held traces of Leo, a book on Italian architecture on her shelf, his favorite coffee in her cupboard. Leo's house began to lose its museum-like quality. Anya's laughter echoed in the kitchen. A Ukrainian children's book appeared on Luka's nightstand. They were, against all odds and statistics, happy, but systems seek equilibrium, and their equilibrium was about to be tested. The pressure came from two fronts, one internal and quiet, the other external and loud. The internal front was Anya's own heart. The more she loved Leo and Luka, the more a deep, old fear stirred, the fear of the other shoe dropping. Her life had been defined by sudden, catastrophic loss of home, of safety. To love this much was to create a masterpiece on the edge of a cliff. She found herself waiting for the sign, the mistake, the moment this would be revealed as a dream. The external front was Leo's family. His parents, well-meaning but steeped in their own grief for Alina, watched this new relationship with protective, worried eyes. They loved Leo. They adored Luka. Anya was an unknown variable, a woman with a tragic past from a country often simplified on the news, a woman who, in their subtle view, complicated the picture. A Sunday dinner was the catalyst. It was meant to be casual, but over lasagna, Leo's mother, Susan, asked Anya a question that seemed innocent but felt like an interrogation. "So Anya, do you see yourself staying here in America long term? It must be so hard, being so far from everything you know." The subtext hung in the air. Are you permanent, or are you a temporary guest in my sons' and grandsons' lives? Anya answered politely about her career and community, but the wall she had taken down with Leo felt like it was being rebuilt, brick, by people whose approval mattered to him. She saw Leo tense, caught between his loyalty to her and his love for his parents. Later in the car, the silence was heavy. "I'm sorry about my mom," Leo finally said. "She's just protective." "I know," Anya said, staring out the window. The "she doesn't trust me" remained unsaid, but it filled the space between them. This was the first crack, not in their love for each other, but in the perfect world they had built. It was a reminder that their relationship existed not in a vacuum, but in a real world with real histories, real prejudices, and real, complicated loyalties. The true escalation began the following Thursday. Leo had a major client presentation downtown. Anya offered to pick Luca up from school and watch him until Leo finished. It was a step, a gesture of practical integration into the family system. Luca was thrilled. The afternoon was smooth, homework was done, snacks were eaten. They built an elaborate spaceship out of Lego. As Anya was cooking dinner, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her sister still in Kiev. A simple update, but the news was heavy, another bombing near their old neighborhood. The familiar, helpless dread coiled in Anya's stomach. She took a moment in the hallway, breathing deeply, pressing her fingers to her temples to push back the wave of anxiety. Luca, coming to ask about the spaceship's name, saw her. He saw her closed eyes, the tension in her shoulders. He froze, his small face clouding with confusion and concern. "Anya," he asked softly, "are you sad?" She opened her eyes, forcing a smile. "No, sweetheart, just a little tired. What about that spaceship?" But the moment had passed. For Luca, whose world had been shattered by a sadness he couldn't understand, seeing sadness in this new, stable person was terrifying. When Leo came home, exhausted but happy from a successful presentation, he was met not with his son's usual tackle hug, but with a quiet boy who clung to his leg and whispered, "I want Mom." 2 words, a child's honest heartache, but in the charged atmosphere of that house, with Anya standing in the kitchen doorway holding a spoon, they landed like a declaration of war. Leo's exhausted face fell. He looked from his son's buried face to Anya's stricken expression. In that moment, the delicate ecosystem they had nurtured faced its first real storm. The language they shared could bridge continents, but could it span the gap between a child's grief and a woman's fear? The perfect understanding they had built was about to be tested by the one force that doesn't obey grammar or vocabulary, the raw, untranslatable logic of a wounded heart. And the decision Leo made next, in that silent, painful kitchen, would determine whether their story was a beautiful interlude or the foundation of something that could truly last. The silence in the kitchen was a physical thing, thick and cold. Luca's whispered wish hung in the air, a ghost that had been waiting in the walls. Anya felt the spoon in her hand become 1,000 pounds. She set it down on the counter with a soft click, the sound absurdly loud. Her heart wasn't breaking, it was retreating, folding in on itself in a practiced survivalist move. This is it, she thought. The shoe, this is where it drops. Leo looked wrecked. The triumph of his presentation had evaporated, replaced by the visceral panic of a father whose child is in pain. He knelt, pulling Luca close. "Hey buddy, I know, I miss Mom too, every day." His voice was a gentle rumble, but his eyes flicked to Anya, wide with a frantic, silent apology. He was trying to hold 2 collapsing worlds at once. He failed. Anya took a step back, her professional calm a mask slipping into place. "Dinner is almost ready, I will go." She moved to grab her coat from the hook, her movements precise and mechanical. "No, Anya, wait." Leo stood, but Luca clung to his leg, a small, insistent anchor. "Please, don't go." "He needs you," she said, her voice perfectly level, devoid of the musicality he'd come to love. "This is family, I am." Interruption. She used the English word deliberately, giving him the out, the clean narrative his parents probably already believed. She was halfway out the door when his voice stopped her, not in English, not in Ukrainian, but in the raw, unvarnished tone of a man at his limit. "Anya, stop, please." She paused on the threshold, her back to him. He pried Luca's arms gently away and walked to her. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, in the space between the home he was building and the one he'd lost. "We are a family," he said, his voice low. "You are part of this family, and families, they have hard moments. Luca isn't rejecting you, he's 6. He saw you hurting and it scared him because he doesn't have the words for his own hurt." Anya turned, her eyes glistening. "I brought my hurt into your home, Leo. My country is burning, and I brought the smoke here. That is not fair to him." "It's real," Leo's voice broke. "It's real, and we don't hide real things in this house. We don't pretend everything is okay when it's not. That's what I learned when Alina died. That's what I never want Luca to learn, to hide his pain to make others comfortable." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. "He doesn't need you to be perfect. He needs you to be here, and I need you to be here, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." In the living room, Luca watched them, his small face a canvas of confusion and longing. Leo led Anya back inside, not to the kitchen, but to the couch. He sat between them, an arm around each. He didn't give a lecture, he just started talking in a calm, steady voice. "Luca, you know how sometimes you feel really sad about Mom, and it's like a big, heavy blanket." Luca nodded, his thumb creeping toward his mouth. "Anya has a heavy blanket too. Her heart is far away, with her family, and sometimes the news from there makes her blanket very heavy. That's what you saw. It doesn't mean she doesn't love being here with us. It just means her heart is big enough to hold more than one place." Luca looked from his father to Anya. "Does your blanket have dinosaurs on it?" he asked, serious. A choked laugh escaped Anya. "No, but maybe it should." "Can I see it?" Anya blinked. "My blanket." "Yeah, if it's here, we can share mine sometimes. Mine is blue." In the language of a 6-year-old, it was a peace treaty. Anya's tears finally fell. "I would like that," she whispered. That night after Luca was asleep, they talked for hours, not about the incident, but about the architecture of their fears. Anya confessed her terror of becoming a burden, of her trauma being a dark cloud over their bright, fragile new life. Leo admitted his fear of failing Luca, of letting his own happiness somehow betray Alina's memory. They named the monsters, and in naming them, the monsters shrank. The next morning, Leo did something decisive. He called his parents and invited them over for lunch, not a formal dinner, but a casual Sunday. "Anya is going to be here," he said, his voice leaving no room for debate, "and we need to be a team." The lunch was awkward at first. Susan brought a pie. Anya had made *Vareniki*, little dumplings. They sat in the backyard. Leo guided the conversation, steering it toward common ground, Luca's upcoming school play, the garden, a funny story from his work. Then he deliberately created an opening. "Mom, Dad, you know Anya's a software engineer. She's actually working on a project right now that helps link volunteers with translation needs for refugee aid organizations. It's pretty amazing." It was a strategic pivot, framing her not as a tragic figure, but as a powerful problem solver. Anya, sensing the play, explained the project briefly, her passion evident. Leo's father, a retired engineer, asked a technical question. A real conversation began. Then Luca, sitting next to Anya, tugged her sleeve. "Tell Grandma about the 3 nights," he said. Anya smiled. She told the story of Orion's belt in Ukrainian, then translated it for Susan. The tale of knights protecting the sky captivated Luca, and even Susan listened, a softness finally touching her eyes. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was a small, shared story, but it was a bridge. As his parents left, Susan hugged Leo, then hesitated before turning to Anya. "Thank you for lunch. The dumplings were delicious." It wasn't an embrace, but it was acknowledgement. It was a start. For a few weeks, the waters calmed. They fell into a deeper, more resilient rhythm. Anya's heavy blanket, talks with Luca became a strange, sweet ritual. He would draw pictures for her to send to her nieces in Kiev. She helped him build a Lego model of the Kiev subway system, turning her homesickness into a shared project. Leo watched them, his heart so full it ached. He started to believe, truly believe, that they could do this, that they could be this messy, beautiful patchwork family. Which is exactly when the universe decided to test that belief in the cruelest way possible. It was a Tuesday. Anya was at her desk, deep in code, when her phone lit up with a call from an unknown number with a Ukrainian country code. Her blood ran cold. It was her aunt, voice frantic, words tumbling over each other. Anya's elderly grandmother, who had refused to leave her apartment in Kiev, had fallen. She was in the hospital. It was serious. The family was gathering. Anya's world telescoped to a single terrible point. She had to go. Now. She called Leo, her voice shaking so hard she could barely form sentences. He heard the tremor, the real, raw terror beneath it. "I'm coming to get you," he said. "Just breathe. We'll figure it out." At his house, they faced the brutal logistics. Flights into the region were chaotic, expensive, and dangerous. Insurance was a nightmare. She would need to go for at least 2 weeks, maybe more. Her job could be handled remotely, but the time zone difference was brutal. Then came the real question. Luka was listening, curled in the big armchair, his knees to his chest. "I have to go," Anya said to Leo, her eyes begging him to understand the unsaid part, "and I don't know if I'm coming back." Leo took her face in his hands. "Then we go." "What? We you me, Luka, we go with you." Anya stared at him, stunned. "Leo, no, it's a war zone, it's not safe. Your job, Luka's school, it's impossible." "It's family," he said, as if it were the simplest equation in the world. "Your grandmother is family, that makes her our family. We don't let family face this alone." The plan he outlined in the next 24 hours was audacious, borderline insane. He would take a family medical leave from his firm. He would pull Luka from school, framing it as a cultural immersion trip. They would fly to Poland, the closest stable point, and take a train into Ukraine. He had contacts from his old expat network, friends who could help with safe lodging. He had been quietly researching routes and safety protocols for weeks. It turned out just in case. He wasn't asking permission. He was presenting a battle plan. Anya was terrified. The thought of bringing them into her world of air raid sirens and trauma felt like the ultimate selfishness. But Leo was immovable. "You once told me you felt like you were always visiting my world," he said. "It's time I visited yours, all of it." The hardest conversation was with Luka. Leo sat him down using simple, clear words. "Anya's grandma, her baba, is very sick. Her heart is in Ukraine, and it's hurting. We need to go help her heart. It might be scary sometimes. There might be loud noises, but we will be together and we will be careful." Luka thought about it. "Will there be nights?" Leo smiled. "The bravest nights you can imagine." 3 days later, they landed in Warsaw. The world shifted. Signs were in Polish and Ukrainian. The air smelled different. Anya, who had been vibrating with anxiety, suddenly became the calm, capable leader. She navigated the train station, haggled for a taxi, spoke in rapid-fire Ukrainian with officials. Leo watched in awe as the woman who sometimes hesitated over English idioms transformed into a formidable, fluent force of nature. This was her element, and she was magnificent. The train ride into Lviv was long and tense. They passed checkpoints. They saw damaged buildings on the horizon. Luka pressed his face to the window, silent and wide-eyed. Leo held Anya's hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. They arrived at the hospital in Kiev as the sun was setting. The scene was chaotic, crowded halls, the smell of antiseptic and anxiety. Anya's family swarmed her, a whirlwind of tears and rapid speech. They looked at Leo and Luka with curious, wary eyes. Then Anya's grandmother, a small, bird-like woman with fierce eyes, beckoned Leo closer from her hospital bed. She spoke in Ukrainian, her voice papery but sharp. "You are the American, the one who learned our language from a restaurant." Leo nodded, answering in his careful Ukrainian. "Yes, grandmother, I am Leo. This is my son, Luka." The old woman studied him for a long, piercing moment. Then she looked at Anya. "He came all this way, into the thunder." "He insisted," Anya said, her voice thick. Her grandmother nodded slowly. Then she reached out a thin, veined hand and patted Leo's arm. "Good," she said. Then she closed her eyes. "Now someone tell me a story, something that is not about this bed." Leo looked at Luka, then back at the old woman. and he began to tell the story of Orion, the three knights, in his halting, earnest Ukrainian. Luca joined in, adding details about the Lego spaceship. Anya translated the gaps, her voice soft. In that stark hospital room, surrounded by the tangible evidence of loss and fear, something unbreakable was forged. Leo and Luca weren't tourists in her tragedy. They were participants in her life. They had chosen to stand in the storm with her. After 2 weeks, Anya's grandmother stabilized. The family would manage. It was time to go home. On their last night, sitting on the balcony of her cousin's apartment, watching the darkened city, Anya spoke. "You didn't just visit my world, Leo. You brought your world into mine, and you made them fit together." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the few brave lights in the Kiev night. "I'm not afraid of the shoe dropping anymore, because if it does, I now know we'll both be standing under it." They returned to Chicago different people. The trip had been a fire that burned away the last of their separateness. Luca now had stories of real knights, the doctors, the volunteers, the cousins who shared their toys. Leo had a profound, weary understanding of the weight Anya carried and a fierce pride in her strength. But the real world had been waiting, and it came with a bill. Leo's firm, while granting the leave, had passed him over for a major promotion in his absence. The financial cost of the trip was significant. The life they wanted, a bigger place, maybe a family of their own, now seemed farther away. And then one evening, as they were sorting mail, Leo found a letter. It was from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Anya's application for permanent residency, which she had filed months ago based on her work visa, had been flagged for additional review. A routine audit, the letter said. But in the current political climate, with her country of origin, it was anything but routine. It could take months, even years. It could be denied. They stood in the kitchen again, the ghost of Luca's whisper long gone, but a new, colder fear taking its place. The foundation they were building, the future they were mapping, was made of sand, and the tide was coming in. Anya looked at the letter, then at Leo, then at Luca, who was coloring at the table, oblivious. The battle they had just won in a hospital in Kiev felt a million miles away. A new, more bureaucratic, more insidious war was beginning, and the weapon wasn't a bomb, it was a piece of paper. The system itself was about to test whether their love was just a beautiful story or a force strong enough to change a fate. Letter was not a full stop, it was a semicolon. The story continued, but the sentence had changed. For a week, a low-grade panic hummed beneath their daily routine. Anya would wake in the night, her mind spinning through worst-case scenarios, deportation orders, separation from Leo and Luca, a forced return to a homeland still at war. The bureaucratic language of the letter felt more menacing than any bomb threat because it was impersonal, faceless, a machine grinding toward an unknown verdict. Leo responded the way he knew how, with research and a plan. He spent evenings after Luca was asleep at the kitchen table, his laptop glowing, navigating the labyrinthine U.S. immigration website. He joined online forums for mixed-status families. He compiled a list of immigration attorneys, scheduling consultations. This was a problem with parameters, and he would solve it. But Anya saw the toll, the shadows under his eyes, the way he'd sometimes just stare into space, the weight of yet another battle on his shoulders. One night, she placed her hand over his on the keyboard. "Stop," she said softly. "For tonight, stop. We are not just this problem, we are still us." She led him to the couch. She made tea. She didn't talk about forms or lawyers. She talked about the first time she heard him speak Ukrainian. She imitated his early, terrible accent, making him laugh despite everything. She reminded him of Luca's face when he saw the real stars over rural Ukraine, far from city lights. She spoke of the future in concrete, present-tense terms. The movie they wanted to see next weekend, the plan to repaint Luca's room, the sourdough starter she was trying to keep alive. She was building a wall of normalcy against the tide of uncertainty, and it worked. Their strategy became two-pronged. Pragmatically, they hired an attorney recommended by a trusted friend in the Ukrainian community. Her name was Marta, a no-nonsense woman who had fought these battles for decades. She reviewed Anya's file. "It's a delay tactic," she said bluntly, "but your case is strong. Your employment is stable, you have community ties. We will answer every question, provide every document. We will bury them in paperwork until they have no choice but to say yes." The second prong was emotional. They decided to live as if the approval was inevitable. They didn't put their lives on hold. When a friend's lakeside cabin became available for a weekend, they booked it. They enrolled Luca in a summer soccer camp. They even started casually browsing listings for houses with more space, a yard. The act of planning a future together became an act of defiance against the system that questioned their right to have one. The paperwork was a mountain. Tax returns, employment letters, bank statements, lease agreements, affidavits from friends and family testifying to the legitimacy of their relationship. They compiled photos from their first date at the bistro to the hospital in Kiev. They printed out pages of their text conversations, a digital tapestry of their love in 2 languages. Leo wrote a letter himself, not as an architect, but as a father and a partner. He wrote about the night Luca asked about Anya's heavy blanket. He wrote about the taste of borscht made from her grandmother's recipe. He wrote about how her courage in uprooting her life mirrored the courage he needed to rebuild his own. Marta submitted the response packet. It was over 200 pages thick. Now, she said, we wait and we live. The waiting was the hardest part. Months passed. Fall turned to winter. They celebrated Thanksgiving with Leo's parents, and this time Susan asked Anya to show her how to make the Vareniki asterisk. Christmas was a blend of traditions, a small tree alongside a asterisk diduk asterisk, a traditional wheat sheaf. On New Year's Eve, as snow fell softly outside, they sat on the floor by the fireplace, the 3 of them. Luca was asleep, his head in Anya's lap. Whatever happens, Leo said, his fingers laced with hers, this is real. This is my family. No piece of paper changes that. Anya leaned her head on his shoulder. I know, she said, and for the first time she truly believed it. Her fear had been of being sent away. Now she understood that home wasn't a country on a map. It was this, the weight of a sleeping child on her legs, the sound of a fire cracking, the man beside her who had learned her language not to impress her, but to understand her heart. The approval came on a Tuesday in March. Anya was in a work meeting when her phone buzzed with an email notification from USCIS. Her breath caught. She excused herself, walking to the empty office kitchen on trembling legs. She opened the email. The subject line, Notice of Action, Application Approved. She read it 3 times, then she called Leo. He answered on the first ring, hearing the tears in her silent breath. Anya. It's approved, she whispered. I can stay. The scream of joy he let out on the other end of the line was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. That night they celebrated quietly, just the 3 of them. Pizza and ice cream cake. Luca didn't fully understand, but he felt the seismic shift in the adult's mood, the lightness, and celebrated accordingly by putting extra pepperoni on everyone's slices. But Leo had one more piece of paperwork in mind, a different kind of application. He didn't do it that night or even that week. He waited for the right moment, for the pure joy of the residency approval to settle into a deep, steady contentment. He chose a Saturday afternoon. They were back at the planetarium with Luca. They stood under the dome, watching a show about the constellations. When the narrator spoke of Orion, Leo squeezed Anya's hand. After the show, as Luca ran ahead to the gift shop, Leo pulled Anya to a quiet corner by a model of the Mars rover. There's something I've been thinking about, he said, his voice soft. Oh, Anya smiled, more paperwork. In a way, he said. He reached into his pocket, but instead of a document, he pulled out a small, worn notebook. It was the one she'd given him in Kiev to jot down new words. He opened it to a specific page and handed it to her. On the page, in his architect's precise handwriting, was a sentence in Ukrainian. Moya elube ove, cheriveri kratkoi de yete yeve izer am ye enye. My love, will you marry me? Below it, he had drawn a simple, perfect ring. Anya looked from the notebook to his face, her eyes wide. He was already holding the real ring, the vintage band with a single diamond she had admired once in a passing comment months ago. Leo. Anya Petrova, he said, switching to English for the final, formal question. You have my heart in every language I know. Will you marry me? The yes was immediate, tearful, and lost in the sound of Luca cheering from behind a display case where he'd been hiding. a co-conspirator in the plan all along. The wedding was the following autumn, in the backyard of the house they had finally bought together. It was small, just family and closest friends. They blended the ceremonies. Anya wore a traditional Ukrainian vinok, a floral crown, over a simple white dress. Leo wore a boutonniere of wheat and baby's breath. They said their vows in both languages. Anya's voice was clear and strong, her English flawless now, not because she had practiced, but because she spoke from a place of absolute certainty. Leo repeated his vows in Ukrainian, his accent improved but still charmingly imperfect, a testament to the journey, not the destination. Luca was the ring bearer, carrying the pillows with solemn importance. When the officiant pronounced them married, he was the first to cheer. The reception was a feast of fusion, pierogies next to lasagna, honey cake and tiramisu. Music shifted from folk bands to jazz standards. Leo's parents danced. Anya's cousins, who had managed to get visas for the event, taught Luca silly dance moves. At the end of the night, under strings of lights, Leo's father gave a toast. He spoke of his initial fears, of his worry for his grandson. Then he looked at Anya. "You didn't just love my son," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You brought our family back to life. You showed us that love isn't about replacing what was lost, but about expanding what can be found. Thank you for making our boy smile again. Welcome to the family officially." It was the full circle moment. The final wall came down. The surprising detail came a year later. Anya, now a permanent resident on the path to citizenship, was invited to speak at a local community center for new immigrants. She stood at the podium, looking out at faces filled with the same fear and hope she once carried. She told her story, not just the romance, but the hard parts, the discrimination, the self-doubt, the bureaucratic nightmares. Then she introduced her family. Leo and Luca joined her on stage. Leo spoke about the practicalities of support, finding good lawyers, building community. Then Luca, now 8, stepped to the microphone. He was nervous but determined. He looked at the crowd and said in clear, carefully practiced Ukrainian, "My mom taught me that different languages are just different colors. Our family uses all the colors. Don't be afraid of your color." The room erupted in applause. Anya looked at her son, then at her husband, her heart so full she thought it might light up the entire room. The little boy who had once whispered for a mother he lost was now proudly claiming the one he had found in her own language. They walked out into the cool evening, a family unit complete. The battles were not all over, life guarantees no such thing, but the war for their right to exist together was won. They had the documents, the rings, the shared history etched in 2 languages and across 2 continents. Anya no longer rehearsed apologies in the mirror. Her English was confident, still accented, but the accent was now a note in her symphony, not a flaw to be hidden. She spoke in meetings, told jokes, argued with Leo about the dishes, all with the unself-conscious flow of someone who is home. And sometimes, on quiet mornings, Leo will still turn to her and say something in Ukrainian, just to see her smile, just to remember the night. A simple act of linguistic kindness unlocked a world. They built a life from that moment. A life where "I'm sorry for my English" was replaced by "I love you" in every language they shared. They learned that the strongest foundations are not poured from concrete, but from the willingness to learn each other's words, to shoulder each other's grief, and to say yes to a shared table, no matter how stormy the world outside might be. So what do we take from a story like this? That love conquers all? That's too simple. Love doesn't conquer, it builds. It builds bridges where there were walls, fluency where there was silence, and family where there was once just empty space. Anya and Leo's story is not a fairy tale because it was easy. It's a testament because it was hard. It's a map of what happens when we choose to meet someone not on our own shore, but in the deep, uncertain waters between us. We live in a world that often treats difference as a barrier, accents as a deficiency, and immigration as a political debate instead of a human story. But at its core, every single one of us is just looking for a place at the table, for someone to hear our heart in whatever language it speaks. The most radical act of love might not be a grand gesture, but the quiet decision to learn someone's native tongue, not to impress, but to understand. To say, in effect, "Your world matters to me. I will carry a piece of it." For every person who has ever felt their words were broken, remember, Language is not a test to be passed. It's a hand to be held. It's a bridge built one honest, stumbling word at a time. And the most beautiful families are not born from perfect, matching pieces, but from the courageous art of fitting different ones together. Anya, Leo, and Luca are out there, living their ordinary, extraordinary life. Their story continues, written in 2 languages, anchored by a love that was not found in spite of their differences, but built because of them. They are the living proof that sometimes the most profound journey begins with a single, simple sentence. A sentence you might be too afraid to say. A sentence someone might be waiting their whole life to hear. This story moved you. If it reminded you of your own bridges or the walls you'd like to dismantle, then do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button, because we tell stories like this every week. Stories about the messy, beautiful human connections that redefine what family, love, and home can mean. We'd love for you to be part of this community. Drop a comment below and tell us, what's one word you wish someone understood in your native language? Let's keep building bridges together. Thanks for watching. And remember, the next time you have the chance to offer a seat at your table or to learn a few words in someone else's tongue, say yes. You never know what world you might be welcoming in.